Hello, thanks for listening to the Finance Leadership Podcast. It's the latest update and news from the Finance Leadership Programme. It's produced by AICPA and CIMA together as the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. You can find out more at aicpa-cima.com or the FLP registration site, which is enroll.cgma.org. Today I'm joined by Alex Whelan. Alex, I'll let you introduce yourself in a moment. I just wanted to take this opportunity to let any listeners know that we're slightly changing the focus of the podcast for 2026. Our plan is that we're going to run a series that essentially will help particularly OCS students in terms of getting some insight into the upcoming operational case study exam. So we'll have guests. Alex may appear quite often on this podcast, but obviously the cases will change. But the focus, rather than talking generally about accounting and finance, will be more of an aid and a guide for students sitting the exam. So obviously, we're waiting on the February case study exam, which is obviously a resit window. So for OCS, we have an organization called Sumtrix. And for anyone who was unfortunately unsuccessful the first time, who's now resitting this case, this will be of interest to you. So anyway, I'll be quiet now and I'll welcome our guest today. So Alex, thanks for joining. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, please?
Of course. Thank you for having me, Kevin. So my name is Alex. It's Alex Whelan. My career, I'm CIMA qualified. So I've been CIMA qualified for 15 years. I started at Ford Motor Company. So I went straight into industry, worked at Ford Motor Company for 5 years. I've worked for Barclays Bank. I've worked for an energy company called Centrica, and I worked in equity finance at the end. So I worked in a software house, which was called Iris Finance. My day job for a lot of that role was a lot about internal reporting, but I also did a lot of budgeting. So it is, similar to Sumtrix, so core activity B for budgeting. I did a lot of budgeting, stakeholder management. As I progressed through my career, similar things. I'm looking after stakeholders. The numbers just got bigger and bigger, and the support just got a little bit more intensive. But I love my job. I love being CIMA qualified. Incredibly proud to be CIMA. I've been a tutor at Kaplan now for 4 years. So COVID came along. I had a varied career in industry. I enjoyed it very much, but I'd been in it for about 15 to 20 years. Needed a bit of a change. And I absolutely adore my job. So sort of helping students get to the next level, progress through their qualification is very motivating to me. So being a tutor for 3 or 4 years and absolutely love my job.
Fantastic, very varied experience that you bring to that tutoring job as well, Alex. So the fact that you have so much and a wide variety of industry experience in multiple sectors is a big benefit.
I have had quite a varied career, obviously at Ford Motor Company, working sort of in manufacturing, and it was on the financial services side, but working with obviously manufacturing, producing cars, and then in, as I said, Barclays and Centrica, a lot around financial services there. But yes, hopefully a bit of a varied career, and I can bring hopefully a bit of expertise to it.
Good. Well, that'll be very useful for today, obviously. So we're talking about Sumtrix, which for anyone who hasn't read the pre-seat material at this stage, I would be concerned. So, Alex, about Sumtrix, obviously they are a manufacturer of skis in multiple markets. Have a different number of sectors that they focus on, from freestyle to touring to custom skis. Is there anything else, having read the case, that really stands out to you as an organization that they do differently or something of note?
I would say this is quite a sort of typical case study, but as you say, freestyle and touring skis, just to add to the custom skis, they do have the highest margin around custom skis. So there may be a question when it comes to costing around that, but they do have a very loyal sort of customer base. They like the lighter skis from the pre-scene. So please read the pre-scene if you haven't, but from that point of view, the artwork is sort of a unique selling point for them. So their customers sort of value that. And, they have sort of built up their brand. From an operational point of view, they do have their facility based in Reland, which is very sort of common, that there'll be a local production centre sort of based in their country of operations. They use machines, but they're sort of absorbing cost through labour, so quite a labour-intensive process. And other things that stick out, which is quite sort of atypical from sort of an operational case study, is that they do have sort of 2 distinct channels. sort of the websites and the retailers. So that can kind of lead into core activity C around sort of KPIs. But sort of 61% of their revenues come from retailers and 39% from websites. But as you say, sort of they do produce skis. You could argue that they may have a slightly limited product range, but yeah, custom skis driving the highest margins. So there may well be a question around that.
Yeah, typically anything custom comes with a lot of challenges as well. So cost of production and the hassle and throughput and all those things as well. But
sustainability level and stuff like that, how would that be produced? And then design, and you could see maybe a costing question around that. So sort of calls around custom skis. But just very high level. So I said, if you have some numbers, it can be good, everyone, to sort of have some metrics from the pre-scene ready to go. So particularly around their financials. Now they are profitable. So they're sort of $810,000 dollars each year. So they are profitable. They have kind of a reasonable cash position. So looking at their statement of financial position, there is $290 dollars. Revenue is growing. So revenue is growing. It's only grown by 6.7%, but year on year growth is okay. As I said, they have a very loyal following around here. They use social media a lot. So if there was any kind of new initiatives, they probably would be looking to sort of use influencers and sort of social media to get their message out. From a sort of bad, or maybe not bad, but maybe weaknesses of your SWOT. As Kevin has mentioned, it's obviously a skiing business. They will be subject to seasonality. So seasonality, obviously they need snow to go around on skis. So around that, there may be some questions around time series analysis. So if you kind of consider that, time series analysis is about trend and seasonality. So that sort of does stick out straight away. As well with seasonality, they will be producing units all the way around the year, and they need to be ready to go to talk to retailers. So what that may mean is that they will have sort of more stock, more inventory. The costs of holding inventory may well be a question too. And then from a costing point of view, which is very common for OCS, and they do absorb costs on labor hours. Again, as we kind of alluded to gently already, there may be a question around margins, particularly around custom skis. Finally, around red flags, their market share. So they are niches. So they can't, if you look at the pre-scene, there are sort of 5 large global players. And from Sumtrix point of view, they only have 2.8% of the European market. So when you're answering the questions, everyone, do be aware that they can't compete with those people at the moment because they are niche, and they're going to have to come up with sort of clever ideas, leverage social media, leverage their base and their brand to kind of drive growth. Supply chain, they do import raw materials from North America. So that's where maple's coming in. From the pre-scene, there was also talk about bamboo. Now, that seems slightly odd to me because if you read through the pre-scene, there was a lot around sustainability. They talk about climate change, sustainability around that. Seems slightly odd to me because they import from North America. Reland is based in Europe. So sort of, yes, they're sustainable, but, the transport miles around importing maple, feels like a slight disconnect there between their sustainability message. And then cost control. I'm jumping into cost control, so maybe a perfect place for the CGMA transformation model. But gross margin is around 40%, 39.7, which looks healthy. However, they're below the line, so below gross margin down to operating profit. Admin expenses and distribution costs do look a little bit high, and they're around sort of 9%, 9.7%. That is higher than their revenue growth. So again, sort of that's making my spider senses tingle. Maybe slightly, there may be a cost around sort of cost transformation. How can we streamline costs? Because at the moment, they are sort of outstripping revenue growth. So there's just a little height with good, bad, and red flags, just sort of 4 or 5 minutes of things that are kind of interesting from Sumtrix.
a couple other things I had written down about, particularly with North America. Do you think there's scope here to be examined around changes in anything to do with distribution with North America? I know it's not relevant particularly to the case, but trade and tariffs is in everyone's minds on a daily basis.
Yes, as we were I'm talking about at the beginning, I do teach a few sort of later case studies as well, and certainly currency risk will definitely be a question later on. Maybe hedging products, but for OCS particularly, yes, transporting things across around the costs that are incurred in North America and brought across to us, that could well be a consideration. I don't think there'll be any kind of hedging because that's not in your competencies for there, but certainly from a sort of understanding of how costs are built up. And then just a reminder, everyone, obviously, if you know your cost, you can control your costs, but don't forget that's a driver of price as well. So if you're absorbing too much overhead into some sort of cost, then there is a potential that they're setting their prices incorrectly. But yes, there was certainly some considerations around how we import materials would definitely be a consideration for that.
You've covered most of the key points in the case that jump out from a quick read. Anything that you see around variances there at all?
Yes, so I have prepared something just for going down each core activity, but yes, absolutely. Having core activity C around variances, absolutely. I will use tactful language. Obviously, please prepare for anything. OCS will be, a application of competencies that you're learning from the FLP platform. But just moving down ones that are commonly examined, please prepare for everything. But I would recommend these as a starting point. So core activity A, traditional costing. So from the pre-scene, this is why it's important to get over the pre-scene, everybody, because Sumtrix absorbs fixed overheads through labor hours. So how much labor hours are, particularly around that overhead, well, definitely around overheads, how much they're absorbing into products. A very common question in OCS is a movement towards ABC. So activity-based costing, cost pools and cost drivers. So ensure that you've got something to say around that. Again, particularly, I know we were talking about their product range before, but custom skis, just again, thinking out loud, custom skis, the design, the setup of machines and people to drive those custom skis. Now, particularly around the design stage around that could be quite expensive. It may be quite simplistic just to absorb cost on labor hours. So again, what is the cost pools and cost drivers around design? So ABC versus absorption costing, and said from the pre-scene, they use their traditional system of absorbing on labor hours. Digital costing. Digital costing is also another very common core activity A, which is costing. Digital costing, setting up an app. That can be a common thing that is examined at OCS. So digital costing versus traditional costing. And one of the reasons why is because they're quite different. So traditional costing, where you are dealing with manufacturing and absorbing overheads through labor hours, where digital costing, where the marginal cost of producing something is next to nothing. So again, please be aware of the steps of digital costing versus traditional costing, and particularly around setting up an app. So that's core activity A. Core activity B, which is budgeting, which is one of the larger areas of OCS. So that's up to 25% of your exam. Very common budgeting around incremental budgeting, which is what Sumtrix uses at the moment, versus zero-based budgeting. Now, it comes back to what I was saying before around maybe their kind of below gross margin costs look a little bit odd. Maybe there's a question around cost transformation. Now, incremental budgeting is where you add on an extra period to last year adjusted for inflation. So if you're thinking about that and you've got some costs that you need to streamline because costs year on year look quite high, if you use incremental budgeting, you'll be pushing that inefficiency into next year. So again, that seems to me that could be potentially a question. Also, incremental budgeting probably quite suitable for Reland, which is their home operations, where zero-based budgeting probably more suitable for a new venture. If you think about a new product, there isn't any increments to add to. You have to build a new project or new product bottom up. So zero-based budgeting is almost forced in a new product. Rolling budgets are on here. They have a seasonal business. So they have a seasonal business with all year round production. So rolling budgets, core activity B is budgeting, and one of them is rolling budgets. It could be potentially a storyline here. And then as mentioned, time series analysis, the way to forecast. There's high-low method, linear regression, and time series analysis. The reason I'm picking on time series analysis particularly is because of a seasonality expert part. So working out a trend, yes, I think that could be a thing, Kevin, around the seasonality around it. Core activity C, which you were alluding to, was variances. I would say please prepare for everything, everyone, but variances and KPIs in most variants will be examined. So particularly around variances around their sales mix and their sales quantity. So the freestyle versus touring skis, you could see around a question around mix. Also just by channel, so by retailer and by website, can you identify sales mixes and sales quantity? We'll talk about tips at the end of this podcast, but do remember to talk about in general terms, just for one sentence, please, but to explain what mixed variances are, because sometimes that's not explained very well. And then importantly, which Kevin alluded to, I think, is to keep coming back to Sumtrix. One of the problems around sort of weaker scripts is that there was not enough application to the scenario. So do describe what a variance is and then link it back to the scenario, please. KPIs will be in nearly most variants. It's normally 3 to 4 KPIs. Again, KPIs will be normally, I teach some OCS, some students will say, I think I can do a KPI. And then they find that particularly their KPIs are not smart enough. So smart, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely, particularly about being specific. So just again, thinking out loud from what the discussions we've had this morning, sustainability KPIs. Make sure that you've got a bank of answers ready for sustainability that you apply to the scenario, please. So sort of emissions, wastage, Sumtrix cares about sustainability, and we could see a question around sustainability KPIs. And then the usual ones, we are dealing with a manufacturer, please, production KPIs, distribution KPIs, talking around production downtime, inventory days. Make sure that you've got some sort of bank of answer for that, please. So core activity C, I can't promise, please, but most variants would have variances and KPIs. So please make sure you have something to say about that. Core activity D. So this is where all the sort of accounting standards are. Now, operational case study is quite technical. Now, I do teach some of the later case studies too. Operational case is particularly technical. Management case study becomes a little bit less technical and a bit about acumen. So for OCS, which is what we're talking about, capitalizing PPE. So what cost can be capitalized as part of an asset, and what is expense to the P&L. So some clear distinction between the two financial statements. I'm going to ignore the cash flow statement at the moment, please, but the statement of financial position and the statement of P&L. Any question, everyone, about core activity D, do try to consider, because it's about financial accounting, do try and consider the initial treatment and the subsequent treatment. So if you do struggle with these kind of questions, the initial treatment PPE, what can I capitalize? So all the costs around bringing the asset to its current location. And then the subsequent treatment around how we depreciate an asset. So straight line and reduce and balance. Another common one is leasing. So leasing, again, initial treatment and subsequent treatment, please. Lease liabilities and right of use assets. So knowing the initial treatment of both of those and the subsequent treatment. So the initial treatment of a lease liability, discounting some cash flows, the present value of a lease liability, and how that populates into the right of use asset. How we then make interest payments and payments to the lessor, it's for lessor in OCS, and then the right of use asset, how we get that in, and then how we depreciate it. So core activity D, maybe some questions around impairment. So as discussed, Sumtrix is a manufacturer of skis around here. So maybe some impairments and knowing a little bit about carrying values, recoverable amounts, value and uses, making sure that you have some technical skills, please. Our core activity E, so just the final two. Our core activity E is up to 25%. So core activity B, C, and E can be up to 25% of your exam. That is short-term decision making, and that is all based on contribution. So think about costing, think about marginal costing. Marginal costing is based on contribution, and core activity E is all about that. So particularly around that bottlenecks in production, we've already talked about materials arriving from North America. Is that going to cause a bottleneck? Please be ready for expected values, please. So expected values based on probability, particularly around decision making. The disadvantages of using all expected values is just probability. Driving decision making through probability is probably inappropriate. Please know the disadvantages. It should be used for many, many times. It's not an actual number. So please know the disadvantages of that. Common things that are in attachments in core activity E: decision trees, or they use expected values, and payoff tables. So if you get any attachments, please do try to reconcile at least one line of a payoff table. And the decision tree, if you want to answer a decision tree question well, you should be able to reconcile the decision tree from right to left. Final little things in core activity E: relevant costing, so underpinned by the concept of future incremental cash flows. And how that is commonly examined is that you'll be given an attachment, and then you'll need to be identify cash flows that are in the future, so ignore anything that's sunk. Please ensure that it's incremental. So just thinking out loud, if there is 200,000 Reeland dollars beforehand and then going to spend 600,000 Reeland dollars afterwards, the incremental impact is 400,000. So do ensure you include the incremental elements, please. And then the final part of future incremental cash flows is cash. So please make sure that you don't include depreciation. And then OCS core activity F, and particularly around working capital. So please do know their working capital cycle. So sort of inventory days are at 72 days, receivables at 47. This is a perfect way to bring in the pre-scene, everyone, to have those up your sleeve. Maybe managing sort of cash deficits, inventory management particularly. They produce inventory the whole year round, just in time. I would say also economic order quantity models. Please make sure you know that. And I would say particularly around also just in time and economic order quantity, there are stages and benefits associated to those things. So please know that's for the exam, because sometimes that's not answered very well, basically. How to manage receivables. So maybe sort of some factoring, some invoice discounting around that, particularly in a foreign venture. So if Sumtrix sets up in a new company, they won't know their customers, they won't know their propensity to pay. So there may be sort of a question around maybe they should use some sort of factor or receivable on the ground. So I appreciate we can't talk about the whole of there, but there is sort of a whistle-stop tour of all 6 core activities. Please prepare for everything, everyone. But, those are the common things that are examined.
That's excellent, Alex. I mean, it's very comprehensive. I've got nothing to add. So it does cover everything that you could see from the pre-scene and the most commonly tested areas. We always tell students, look, if you repeat it many times, prepare for everything. Look at the past papers. Look at the model answers. You got to do everything for the OCS because it is, as you say, very technical.
Yeah. So on the CGMA Hub, there is some fantastic resources. My students use it all the time. Particularly sort of structure of answers, getting a feel for how they're answered. And as you say, the technical side of it, you don't have to read all the pre-scenes for that, but just get a feel for, oh, look, there's a question around depreciation. There's a question around leasing. And you should be able to then sort of get a kind of feel and a sort of familiarity of what those questions entail.
Any further tips or hints that you would throw in there for students before we wrap up?
Yes, I sort of always advise my students. Now, hopefully this is quite intuitive, but just for the avoidance of doubt, please do use your planning time effectively. So you're given up to 20% planning time. So each task is worth 45 minutes. So, and it will be broken down into usually 2 core activities. So your planning time will be anything up to sort of 9 minutes. Now, some people may take a little bit less time than that. But my advice would be, please do use the planning time. I do understand in the exam, the adrenaline is pumping. You just want to start writing. I do understand. But just a little bit of care, please. Take that planning time. Break down requirements, please. So when you get a requirement in the exam, I know this is hopefully quite intuitive, but look for key verbs, please. What is the question explicitly asking me to do? That should then lead into natural subheadings, please. Now, subheadings, in my personal opinion, are great because they are leading your answer, you're leading the marker of your paper to your thought pattern. So you're kind of thinking it. So I would like to talk about this, please. I then, as the marker, read, okay, you've now used a subheading. It focuses my attention. My recommendation would be use just one generic general sentence to explain your subheading. So then it leads very neatly into your main answer. Your main answer has to be applied to Sumtrix, please. Sometimes there's a few weaker answers, so maybe the bottom end of level 2, level 1, they're just a little bit too generic, please. Other common things, please. please reference attachments. That is incredibly important. So if you get an attachment, you will be able to talk about it. Ideally, guys, on a line-by-line basis. Now, I do understand that timings are going to be important, but do make sure that you're considering attachments, please. Subheadings, I'm going to quickly go back to that on here. They're also great for timing issues. So if you read a requirement, let's say that you've identified 4 natural subheadings. There's a requirement is worth 50% of the task. That's about 22 minutes, 23 minutes, something like that, with some planning time, which is around 10 or 20%. So let's just say you've got about 18 minutes to write. If you've identified 4 subheadings, that only gives you 4 or 5 minutes per subheading. So subheadings, good to focus your mind, but also good for timing. So anyone out there that's listening, if you do have issues with timings, subheadings can be a good way to, I want to move on from this, use a separate subheading and then move on. Manage your time effectively, please. Keep coming back to Sumtrix. My advice would be particularly around KPIs, have some KPIs, but you're ready to comfortably talk around sustainability and production, distribution, and then you can apply that in the exam. And I know this is incredibly easy to say, but trying to stay calm, please, on here. I do understand, you want to get going, and it's very normal to have a little bit of anxiety of how is this going to be examined. As Kevin has mentioned, my recommendation, just one day before the exam now, please, or maybe a day and a half, go to the CGMA Hub, download some previous papers, please, and hopefully that kind of will ease your anxiety, because you'll see that some questions are examined quite frequently, particularly around KPIs, costing, and variances. So there's just a whistle-stop tour of advice there, Kevin.
Yeah, no, great. I think little is better sometimes, with your answers. And the way you structured the questions with subheadings is excellent, because that, as you say, dictates the time, but also helps you get some of the information down on a page quickly before you forget it. Sometimes for some people, that the way their minds work, getting the subheadings down, or at least getting them down start in the planning stage, helps you then get a sense of ease because you've remembered the key points, and then it's just about elaboration.
Yeah, I don't think it will come as a surprise, everyone. Accountants like structure. So use that planning time. I need 4 subheadings in your planning time, please. Just some general thoughts. I want to talk about these 3 things under that subheading. And then if you can sprinkle in some of the pre-scene as well, please, all the better. And I said, if you think, what can I talk about pre-scene? Things that are jumping out, particularly their financials, things around working capital and sort of cash that's tied up. And then, as we've kind of spoken about already, sustainability, be ready for some sort of sustainability.
Yeah, sustainability, so that's a given, I think, personally. But that's excellent, Alex. I mean, fantastic insight there, I have to say. Very detailed and very relevant to the case, which is what students need at this stage. So thank you very much for taking the time and joining the podcast today. Appreciate that.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. I'm very proud to be CIMA qualified. I'm more than happy to come back. And everyone out there, good luck in your exams. I'm CIMA qualified. It's all worth it. Hopefully see you for the next podcast.
Just for everyone who is sitting the exam in February, obviously, best of luck, remain calm, and please take Alex's advice, because a lot of it is very, very good. Thanks to Alex again for taking time to speak with us. There'll be show notes with links to, for example, the study hub available. To view those show notes, just click on the info icon in the podcast app on your smartphone or tablet, or open the episode in your computer's browser. For more information, go to enroll.cgma.org. Thank you for listening. If you know anyone interested in listening to this podcast, feel free to share it. You'll find the sharing buttons on the podcast app. That's it for now. We'll have another episode for the next sitting of the next case. We'll also have an episode next week specializing on resources for resetting. So for anyone that's relevant, you can listen to that one. That will be delivered next week. Okay, thanks very much again, and wish everyone good luck on their exam.
This content is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered, and does not represent an official opinion or position of the AICPA, the Association, or CIMA. It is provided with the understanding that they are not engaged in offering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The AICPA, the Association, and CIMA make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to, and assume no responsibility for, the content or application of the material contained herein, and especially disclaim all liability for any damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.